Quick disclaimer before we start. I know superfood is an overused, watered-down marketing word at this point. Most lists like this are recycled nonsense with zero human data behind them. This one isn't. Every food here has at least one human clinical trial or meta-analysis behind it, and a couple of them are going to surprise you because they're foods you've probably written off or never considered for fat loss at all. Let's get into it. 1. Algae protein, spirulina. This one throws people off immediately. It's a blue-green freshwater microalgae. Yes, the stuff that sounds like pond scum. But it's also why space agencies and military researchers have studied it as an emergency food source. Gram for gram, it's one of the densest protein sources that exists, with protein making up over half its dry weight. Why that matters for visceral fat specifically? High protein intake triggers a gut hormone, PYY, that signals satiety to your brain, which helps with appetite control generally. But this algae has a second mechanism, a blue pigment compound that appears to interfere with the immune cells that infiltrate visceral fat tissue and drive local inflammation. That inflammatory loop inside belly fat is part of what makes it stubborn and metabolically harmful in the first place. A pooled analysis of multiple randomized trials found that supplementing with this algae was associated with reductions in body weight, body fat percentage, and BMI in people who were overweight or obese. How to use it. Stir half a teaspoon to start, working up to 1 to 2 teaspoons, into a smoothie with a bold fruit flavor like mango or pineapple to mask the earthy taste. 2. Grapefruit. This one got buried under bad 1980s diet fad marketing, and the original claims that it contained some magic fat-melting enzyme were never true. But underneath the hype, there's a real compound at work, a citrus flavonoid that activates 2 regulatory proteins controlling how your body stores versus burns fat, and that also improves insulin sensitivity. In a placebo-controlled trial, participants who ate half a fresh grapefruit before each meal for 12 weeks lost more weight than the placebo group and saw measurable improvements in insulin resistance, with the strongest effects in people who already had metabolic syndrome. Important caution. Grapefruit interacts with a long list of medications, statins, certain blood pressure drugs, and some blood thinners. If you're on prescription medication, check with your doctor first. How to use it. Half a grapefruit with breakfast, eating as much of the white pith as you can tolerate since that's where the active compound is most concentrated. 3. Fatty fish, salmon, sardines, mackerel. 3 separate reasons this belongs on the list. First, omega-3 fats lower the chronic low-grade inflammation that quietly disrupts hunger hormones and blunts insulin sensitivity over time. Second, the protein content, roughly 25 grams per 100 gram serving, supports the same satiety pathway mentioned earlier. Third, and this one rarely gets discussed, fatty fish is one of the best dietary sources of iodine, which your thyroid needs to produce the hormones that set your resting metabolic rate. Iodine deficiency is more common than people assume, and an underfueled thyroid means a slower metabolism across the board. How to use it. 2 to 3 servings per week. Wild caught tends to have a higher omega-3 content than farmed. 4. Green tea. It's on every list, but the actual mechanism gets glossed over. The magic isn't one compound, it's 2 working together. A catechin called EGCG and caffeine. Individually, neither does much. Together, they appear to slow the breakdown of noradrenaline, the signaling molecule that tells your body to mobilize and burn fat. Blocking its breakdown keeps that fat-burning signal active longer. Human studies link this combination to modest but measurable increases in calorie burning and fat oxidation. How to use it. 2 to 3 cups daily, ideally before exercise. Brew with water around 175 to 180 degrees Fahrenheit, not boiling. Overly hot water degrades the catechins. 5. Chili peppers. The active compound, capsaicin, triggers heat-sensing receptors, prompting your body to respond as if its temperature has risen, increasing calorie burn slightly through thermogenesis. To be honest about the size of the effect, we're talking maybe an extra 50 calories a day, which is not dramatic on its own. The more useful effect is appetite-related. Studies show eating chili with a meal tends to reduce intake at the next meal. How to use it. Add fresh or dried chili to meals as tolerated, or use a half teaspoon of cayenne for a manageable dose. 6. Avocado. People avoid it on diets because it's high fat, which misunderstands the fat type. It's mostly monounsaturated fat, the same category found in olive oil, which behaves very differently from saturated fat. It improves insulin sensitivity and helps lower LDL cholesterol. One controlled trial found that replacing refined carbs with daily avocado intake was associated with a reduction in visceral fat specifically in women. It's also exceptionally high in fiber, 10 to 13 grams per avocado, which slows digestion, extends fullness, and feeds beneficial gut bacteria tied to appetite regulation. How to use it. Swap it in for refined carbs rather than stacking it on top of them. Half an avocado with eggs on toast instead of extra bread, for example. 7. Chia seeds. Extremely calorie efficient for the satiety they provide. About 140 calories per 2 tablespoons with roughly 10 grams fiber and 5 grams protein. The soluble fiber absorbs liquid and swells to roughly 10 to 12 times its original volume, forming a gel that slows gastric emptying and glucose absorption, meaning steadier blood sugar and longer-lasting fullness per calorie consumed. They're also a solid plant-based source of anti-inflammatory omega-3s. How to use it. 2 tablespoons stirred into yogurt, oats, or a smoothie, left to sit 10 to 15 minutes to fully gel. 8. Cinnamon. Most people think of it purely as flavoring, but the active compound, cinnamaldehyde, measurably improves insulin sensitivity, helping more of the glucose from a meal get shuttled into muscle for fuel rather than stored as fat. It also slows gastric emptying slightly, flattening the blood sugar spike after carb-heavy meals. How to use it. Half a teaspoon stirred into coffee, oats, or yogurt. 9. Ginger. Used in traditional medicine for centuries, but unusually for this category, it actually has modern human trial data behind it. The active compounds, gingerols and shogaols, are mildly thermogenic, similar to capsaicin, and also anti-inflammatory. A meta-analysis of human trials found ginger supplementation was associated with reductions in body weight and waist-to-hip ratio in people who were overweight or obese, 2 mechanisms, thermogenic plus anti-inflammatory, working in tandem rather than one alone. How to use it. Fresh grated ginger in tea, smoothies, or meals. A thumb-sized piece steeped in hot water with lemon makes a simple daily dose. 10. Extra virgin olive oil. The most calorie-dense item on this list at about 120 calories per tablespoon, which sounds counterintuitive for a fat loss list. But the compounds matter more than the calorie count here. Its primary fat, oleic acid, improves insulin sensitivity and appears to activate genes involved in fat metabolism. What separates extra virgin olive oil from refined versions is a compound called oleocanthal, a natural anti-inflammatory that works through a similar pathway to ibuprofen. Since chronic inflammation is one of the quiet drivers behind stalled fat loss, reducing it creates a better metabolic environment overall, not as a direct fat burner, but as a replacement for worse oil sources. How to use it. Use as your primary cooking and dressing oil in place of refined seed oils. Choose cold-pressed, dark bottled oil to protect the active compounds from light degradation. None of these are magic. They're not going to override a calorie surplus or replace training. What they do is support the hormonal and inflammatory environment that makes fat loss, especially stubborn visceral fat, easier to achieve when you're already in a deficit.